Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Killman is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are my 10 best Warlock cards. Now, when I say best, I don't necessarily mean these cards would win in a fight on an empty board, so they're not just like the biggest, strongest minions, but these are the cards that have had the biggest impact on the class and influence on the metagame. In other words, they define the kinds of decks that have made Warlock such a strong class, currently and throughout the history of Hearthstone. So starting off with number 10, it's actually right here in the 1-drops. It is the card Mortal Coil. This 1 mana spell may not sound like it does a lot, since it only does 1 damage specifically only to minions. But if it kills that minion, of course, Mortal Coil also draws you a card. And Warlock doesn't have a lot of great ways to ping off 1 health minions, which is incredibly important when you're jostling for board control, which is always fundamental to success, not only in Warlock really, but in Hearthstone in general. So this allows you to kind of have some flexibility with a ping effect. And the nice bonus is that when that ping kills something, which is really not very hard to achieve, 98% of the time you use Mortal Coil, it will be the killing blow that draws you that card. And of course, card draw is also fundamental to Hearthstone, and particularly Warlocks, who generally like to either refill their hand or create a big, ample hand with a lot of resources and flexibility. So Mortal Coil fits both of those plans really well, and that's why you'll see it in slow control style Warlocks almost always, and even occasionally it will pop up in quicker or mid-range style Warlocks as well. It's just a fantastic card to have in your kit. Up next at the number 9 spot, it's actually another 1-drop, but this time it is the 1 mana minion Flame Imp. This is a 3/2, which is a very dangerous minion to get out on turn 1. Of course, it does have the downside. Battlecry, deal 3 damage to your hero. But the thing about that is that typically as a Warlock, you don't value your life total all that much, and in some cases you even want it to go lower. So trading off 3 health at the beginning of the game is a very minimal downside. In fact, I would almost argue it's meaningless in 90% of matchups and in most games that you play. So trading that for a very aggressive and powerful minion like Flame Imp feels worth it virtually all of the time, particularly if you can get a couple of these out early and start hitting the enemy's face. You might get 6 or 9 damage out of your Flame Imp for a single mana, which is fantastic when jostling for the board and trying to rush down your opponents in aggressive style like Zoo Warlocks, which Flame Imps are, of course, most popular in. So this has been a staple in Zoo forever, and it will probably remain so just because it has so good of a body for its stat and early game cost. Moving on to the 8th best Warlock card. It is the 4 mana spell Hellfire. Now this one would almost make the list just on its art alone. If you've never looked closely at Hellfire, it's pretty cool. There are some Murlocs, you'll see them here, being essentially burned alive in this altogether too happy looking Warlock's flames here. So that earns it a spot on the list almost, but Hellfire is also just a fantastic card. It does 3 damage to all characters. Now this is most commonly used as a board clear for really slow Warlocks like Handlock or Reno style locks. Just kind of helps you reset the board and deal with lots of nasty little things. You won't see it in decks like Zoo because you don't want to kill your own minions, of course. But despite that, it's just so common and such a fixture in slow style Warlocks that it gains a bonus spot, even though it gains a few bonus spots, I should say. It makes the list despite the fact that it's not in every kind of Warlock deck, just because it's so powerful. It also can be used as direct damage. A lot of the times you'll just need 3 damage to kill your opponent, and Hellfire will be the damage that you need. So it's got some flexibility in that regard as well. I chose Hellfire for this list as opposed to Shadow Flame because Shadow Flame is a little bit more conditional, and despite the fact that it can have a bigger impact on the enemy's board, it doesn't have the flexibility of that direct damage to face. So Hellfire took the edge for me very slightly as kind of the 2 most prominent and popular Warlock board clear spells. I think Hellfire is a little bit better. Moving on to the 7th best Warlock card. It is, let's look at the golden version, the 1 mana Void Walker. This is, much like the Flame Imp, a staple of early game aggressive Zoo style Warlock decks. It's a 1 mana 1/3. But what makes this one so cool is that it has Taunt. And surprisingly, a 1 mana taunt with 3 health is ridiculously good because in the early game. It can help protect lower health, higher value minions like those Flame Imps, for instance. So your Flame Imp might survive an extra turn or two to do damage or trade it into something even bigger that the Voidwalker can't. So it's a good early game it's good at preserving more valuable stuff in the early game. But also sometimes in the late game, it can make a big impact. If they have something like an 8/8 on board that's going to hit your face and kill you for lethal, then you can just play a 1-mana Voidwalker and it might stall that 8/8 minion for another turn and keep you alive while digging for cards and looking for lethal of your own. So that's why Voidwalker will even show up in Reno-style Warlocks as well, where you're just looking for good cards, one-offs to fit into your list, because it has good early game value and late game value as well, so that flexibility is really nice. And it's just a staple, good, free Warlock card that shows up and you never really feel too bad about adding it into any given Warlock list. So that's why it takes the edge over Flame Imp and ranks pretty highly on this list. Moving on to the 6th best Warlock card. Some people might debate me on this one, particularly if you succumb to bad RNG, if you get unlucky from time to time. But in my mind, the 6th best Warlock card is the 4-mana Implosion. The Implosion. Deal 2 to 4 damage to a minion, and summon a 1/1 Imp for each damage dealt. I like this card in this spot just because it fits in all kinds of Warlock decks, right? It's in aggressive Zoo-style decks. It's in late game decks that are looking for some instant board presence and board removal, both of which this offers. And I just like the design of Implosion despite the randomness. Being able to kill something while simultaneously develop your own minions is a very powerful effect that fits into a variety of different decks. Plus, having numerous 1/1 imps synergizes really well with a lot of different cards. For instance, with a Mal'Ganis, right? They all get buffed from Mal'Ganis' effect. With a Knife Juggler, not only are you going to get the damage from the spell, but you're going to get the knife juggles as well from all the imps that you spawn. Warlocks like to run cards like Reliquary Seeker or Sea Giant, where you benefit from having a lot of minions on the board, and that's the kind of thing that Implosion sets up. So not only is this card good in its own right, but it's an enabler of sorts that makes all the other cards even better, almost regardless of the kind of deck you have. So it's very annoying for opponents. Of course, when it rolls a 2, you feel pretty bad, but I think it's still a good card when it rolls a 2, and when it rolls a 4, it's an absolutely ridiculous card. So I like Implosion a lot. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that choice, though. Moving on to the 5th best Warlock card. It is the big one, the 9-mana Mal'Ganis. This is a 9-mana minion with 9/7 in stats, which is just absolutely ridiculous. He hits incredibly hard. And he has 2 effects, as if either one of these weren't enough. Your other demons have +2/+2, so like those imps I just mentioned, you're buffing your entire board of demons. And your hero is immune. Now that one, of course, is the most famous effect that Mal'Ganis offers. So you're unkillable while Mal'Ganis is on the board, which is nice. If he stays around for a turn, that means you can life tap freely without taking damage. You can force your opponents to deal with Mal'Ganis before they deal you a killing blow, so it's good against like combo decks like Druid that just want to kill you right away. And they have to go through Mal'Ganis instead, wasting a 7 health or some mana on a removal spell like Big Game Hunter. Mal'Ganis is even better when you consider cards like this one, the Void Caller, which when he dies, he summons a random demon from your hand, so sometimes you can get Mal'Ganis basically for free from your Void Caller, and that's a huge tempo play that's been great in demon-style Warlock decks. This card is just, it's cool, it's powerful, it's an awesome legendary in every sense of the word. It has some flexibility, it even can be played early sometimes thanks to that Void Caller. And when he hits face or stays alive for a turn or two, it usually signals that you're winning the game. And that's why I like Mal'Ganis so very much. But he's not the best. He just barely cracked the top 5. We got a few more cards I think are even better, starting with number 4. If I can find it, it is the 1-mana spell, Power Overwhelming. Give a friendly minion +4/+4 until the end of the turn. and then it dies horribly, apparently. Power Overwhelming is just so good in every Warlock deck ever. It's great in Zoo-style Warlocks where you have a lot of minions on board because it allows you to do two different things. You can give it to like a 1/1 minion and trade into a 5 health minion, giving you some super value or clearing a taunt that might be in the way. Of course, you can also just use it for late game burst damage. Having a couple of these in hand means you can do an extra 8 damage over the course of that turn, which is often enough to give you lethal. It also works well in kind of mid-range or late-game Warlock decks because it has synergies with cards like Void Terror. If you buff up some minions with a Power Overwhelming and you play Void Terror next to them, it can absorb those stats permanently, so you get like a 1-mana 4/4 buff on your Void Terror. It also works very nicely with Shadow Flame. If you need to increase a minion's attack damage so that Shadow Flame can do even more damage to the enemy board, then Power Overwhelming allows you to do that. You can put it on a 4 attack minion and it'll hit for 8, clearing anything like a giant that might be in the way. And it can do everything, right? It can fit so well into the Warlock kit. It does damage. It helps you clear. It's cheap. And all of that flexibility and utility and power that Power Overwhelming offers makes it the 4th best Warlock card in the game to me. But it's not in the top 3. I've got 3 more I think are even better. Starting off with the 9-mana Lord Jaraxxus. Much like Mal'Ganis, this is another big legendary demon. He's a 3/15 this time around, which are crazy stats, and those really just lead into his battle cry, which is destroy your hero and replace it with Lord Jaraxxus, at which point you're given 15 health and 15 maximum health. And you have a new weapon, which does 3 attack damage 8 times. So that's a 24 attack value weapon, which is nuts. And your hero power becomes summon a 6/6 for only 2 mana. So it's very easy to see that when Lord Jaraxxus comes out early enough, you tend to generate so much ridiculous late game value on the back of your weapon and your hero power that games will snowball into your favor rapidly and become almost unlosable. And that's why Lord Jaraxxus has been a staple in Handlock decks for a very, very long time. He still gets played in slow control style decks as well, like Reno and Demon Zoos and stuff like that. Is a very prominent and popular card that is probably one of the most fun cards in the game as well. And he's always worth some highlights, and your opponents always hate seeing him hit the board. And that's the sign of a very dominant and powerful card, and that's why Lord Jaraxxus cracks the top 3 for me. But there are 2 cards I think are even better. This one might actually surprise you. The 3-mana Imp Gang Boss, yes, I think he's better than Lord Jaraxxus, despite being a 3-mana minion. That's because Imp Gang Boss is just packed with value. You're getting a 2/4 body for 3 mana, which is already pretty solid. 2 4s is not a bad stat allocation for 3 mana, particularly the 4 health, because it trades so effectively into early game minions. But the effect on Imp Gang Boss is what makes it so downright good. Whenever this minion takes damage, summon a 1/1 Imp. So if you do the math there, this has 4 health by default, right? So it could take damage 4 times, which means it would summon 4 1/1 minions at its max efficiency, which means you're getting 4/4 in additional stats on top of the 2/4 you're getting in the first place, which kind of makes this look like a 6/8 for 3 mana. Now, of course, typically you won't be getting 4 hits off your Imp Gang Boss. Usually it'll be something like 1 or 2. But even in that case, that means you're getting a 3/5 for 3 mana, maybe a 4/6 for 3 mana, and it's all spread across different bodies, which typically is better than having one big body just because it requires more resources and responses from your opponent. especially in the case of Imp Gang Boss, because the way it interacts with area of effect damage means even if they use AoEs to deal with it, there's typically going to be one 1/1 imp left. So it's very hard for opponents to trade into and clean up. It works so well, as I've mentioned before, with Warlock's kit, where it's beneficial to have multiple minions out at once because of things like Power Overwhelming. You can trade up from an imp into something scary. You can get some Sea Giants, Reliquary Seekers. Great, works great with Defender of Argus, both because they're forced to attack into Imp Gang Boss to activate its effect, and because you turn those 1/1s into even sturdier 2/2s. So it's an absolute staple in Zoo. It's just so good in Zoo Warlocks that want to build a board presence. But it fits in mid-range and control style decks too, just because it's such a good on-curve play, and it has late-game annoyance value as well to help you kind of build and restore your board. So Imp Gang Boss, despite being a 3-mana minion, I think it's one of the best 3-drops in the game, and arguably the best, and certainly one of the best Warlock cards. But there's one more that I think is better. This may or may not surprise you, but I'm donning Doomguard as the champion of Warlocks. This 5-mana minion is a 5/7, which is awesome, right? It's a good stat allocation. Disregarding the fact that it also has Charge, which is ridiculous because usually Charge has a pretty big penalty on stats. Usually you don't get a lot of health with Charge minions, but Doomguard says forget that noise. I'm going to give you some health and Charge, and I'm going to be cheap. But of course, Doomguard does have one pretty big downside. It's that battle cry, discard 2 random cards from your hand. So if you do play Doomguard with a hand that's full, you're going to drop a couple cards. But the thing is, Doomguard is typically played in faster Warlock decks where you're going to be emptying your hand pretty regularly. Excuse me. And you normally won't have more than 1 or 2 cards left when you draw that Doomguard, and often you might even top deck your Doomguard as well. So the downside here is usually pretty minimal. It's also non-existent when played alongside the Void Caller we mentioned earlier. So in Demon Warlocks, Doomguard becomes incredibly powerful. But even when you have to play this from your hand and you do get that downside, it's typically not that punishing, particularly because a 5/7 with Charge on turn 5 is just a ridiculously dominant play. Whether you're sending it into a big minion to trade efficiently or you're just going for the face, it's so hard for opponents to deal with a Doomguard on curve because they can't use removal like BGH. 7 health makes it incredibly hard to trade into. It's just an inefficient card for most classes to remove. And usually you're using it when you already have a board. So even if they dedicate all their resources towards Doomguard, you probably still have a couple other minions on the board causing chaos as well. And it's perfect for top deck lethals. I don't know how many times we've seen Doomguard come off the top to win games in both tournaments, and I've certainly seen it 1,000 times on ladder, both against me and for me. It's such a decisive card that wins games, that terrifies opponents, that has been an important part of Warlock forever. This kind of card, I think, is just all around so strong and so potent that to me, it's the best Warlock card in the game. Now, I'm sure there are a few people who will debate me about Doomguard's place on this list, as well as a number of other cards. So if that's you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think the best cards are, and I appreciate all the time you take to discuss that with me. So leave a comment, let me know if I'm crazy or not, and thanks so much for watching. Until next time, game on.